Boy, got a lot to talk about today. Hey everybody, this is Kodak here. I had a shaving accident and I hate it. Although, a lot to cover after this video. It's taken me a little bit to get this one together, and that's because, at the moment, episode 6, the script is 8 pages long and shows no signs of getting smaller, but, few things to cover today. First of all, apparently I forgot about 2 Star Wars card games. First of all was another one made by Decipher, who made the original game and the Young Jedi game. They made another game called Jedi Knights. But here's the thing, is the label on the box said Star Wars collectible card game Jedi Knights. So I assumed it was an expansion for this game that started in 1995 and went to 2001. Although a few things about the Decipher game is I recently came to understand that the cards I have from this 1995 game is actually from, these cards are from a starter deck. What they do is the starter decks contain a pair of half decks, one good, one evil, and that's kind of a problem, is because, you know, it means that unlike other games that do the sort of half deck starter strategy, you can't later cobble these two together to put them together to make an allegedly playable full deck, which is how most other games that make use of dual decks tend to do it. No, if you want to play a Decipher game, you can't just buy one starter deck. You have to buy 2 starter decks. And I was joking before about how games, you know, make you buy multiple copies of a deck to get an exclusive card. If you want to play either of any of the Decipher Star Wars games, you are required to purchase 2 starter decks. You can't buy just one and play from there. So, kind of an interesting idea. Although, the fact that Decipher was launching so many Star Wars games towards the end of the lifespan of the original game does telling me that there were some problems with the game. Although, to my understanding, the big problem was that it suffered from rapid accretion. Accretion is a phenomenon in gaming where a game slowly grows in complexity over time due to the accumulation of additional mechanics, card types, and keywords. It is also frequently called feature creep, and is not to be mistaken for power creep because, while power creep is the result of introducing more and more powerful and effective cards, feature creep instead increases a game's complexity, which runs the risk of making it hostile to new players. However, it is also kind of a necessary evil, because a game that never innovates or develops any sort of new ideas is doomed to become stale and boring. Now, accretion has an effect on games that do rotate and don't rotate. They both have to keep coming up with new stuff in order to stay interesting. The only real difference is that a game that does rotate can get rid of ones that maybe do a bit too much harm, whereas a game that doesn't rotate can really only get rid of such harmful mechanics from by banning them, although both games can just stop printing them anytime they want to. Accretion is actually a concept that has affected a lot of games. Like I said, games that rotate haven't really escaped it, but Pokemon did not start off with stadium cards or tool cards or supporter cards when the game originally came out, and yet these days we can't imagine the game without them. So accretion has an effect everywhere. However, the Star Wars collectible card game suffered from, you know, massive accretion and a ton of rules that are pretty esoteric. It's granted, it's more like a modern fan adaptation, but looking at the rule book for the Star Wars collectible card game, it is just the table of contents is 4 pages long, double columned on standard A4 size paper. That is really complicated for a trading card game. Most trading card games, with a lot of trading card games, the rules tend to be fairly simple and the complexity comes from the cards, although there is such a thing as overdoing it. For example, both of these starter decks, the light side and dark side decks, include what are basically identical cards with the listed ability Lay's Minds. Oh boy, I'm sure that's a fun and complicated rule I'd have to look up in the book, although a quick cursory glance through the table of contents didn't reveal what Lay's Minds actually means. In modern card game jargon, this would probably say place a mine token on the current location, and that would be like a card that says what the mines rules would be. It would say like, oh, this is a mines token. What happens is if this occurs, it sets off the mines, in which case this happens, so that the rules that get involved only occur when the card itself comes into play. The other one I missed was the Star Wars LCG, although that's the living card game. Although, in my opinion, living card game is just a marketing gimmick. It's just another term for a card game standalone that has later expansions. I mean, is Sentinels of the Multiverse a living card game? You tell me, because they do later expansions. Honestly, it's a very different kind of thing. Although I did mention that Star Wars, the trading card game, the collectible card game, well, actually the trading card game too, has continued to receive expansions from the fan base. And one of the reasons that is so interesting is, so does the wrestling game Raw Deal. They all have received fan expansions. When these games were gotten rid of, a lot of the fans kind of picked up the mantle and continued to make sets for these games. I know most of them got sets at least until about 2016. But an interesting thing about that is, you know what all three of those games have in common, these two and Raw Deal? They are all screenshot games. They're all games where they take screenshots or like, set photos and use them as the artwork for the cards. And that is a really interesting little fringe benefit, which is really what pushed the idea of using screenshots out of the running for being a sin, is this unusual little fringe benefit. I mean, it's an incredibly minor one, but there is a lot of value to having stock assets. A lot of people were maybe a bit upset in my licensing video that I didn't describe the license holders as like literal slave drivers, and I'm like, okay, I'm not sure how I'm supposed to help you. But a lot of it's not the fact that you're like dealing with a brand or, somebody who owns the intellectual property. I mean, if you get a relatively small intellectual property, it's actually a lot easier because you're dealing with less people. It's the bureaucracy that's the problem. I mean, if you're like talking to the creator directly, like people who like wrote a book or something, like the I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream PC game was licensed directly from the writer, and he actually got really involved in the development of the game itself, and that actually came out really well. The problem is if you deal with larger brands like Nintendo or Lucasfilm, Disney, all of them, they are massive corporations with all sorts of bureaucracy. So the messages that you might send, the cards that you'd send off for approval might wind up in this whole bureaucratic shuffle. It might not get to the same person for approval every time. It's kind of crazy. Like, it can also be pretty bad. A lot of these companies can be pretty strict, and especially in America, they are notoriously pearl clutching for how things can go. But if you spend like $1,000 on a really nice piece of artwork and you send it off to get approved by the license holder, but they reject it because Iron Man's suit is slightly the wrong shade of red, that is what we would call a bureaucratic nightmare, because not only did you spend a lot of time working with and paying that artwork, but now you're going to have to go back and fix it or deal with something else. That's why a lot of games just stick with using the stock assets, because America is a country that is so strict on a lot of the art regulations that there is somebody out there who gets paid a lot of money to remove a single little line from the artwork from every frame of Dark Magician Girl as she appears in the anime. A single little line just below her clavicle. I mean, I guess I shouldn't be too upset. It's keeping somebody employed, but it's still pretty ridiculous. But even with all of that aside, you do have to consider the other hand. I mean, if you own a family-friendly intellectual property, but the artwork that's being developed by the people who want to make a game for it is like borderline corn, you're gonna want to bring down that veto hammer pretty fast. That's a fun analogy. But yeah, if you own a brand, you don't want to see it, taken in a direction that you disagree with, because that then reflects on your brand later. So that's the perspective coming from the other direction. It's not necessarily that corporations are evil, and that's why so many games resort to using stock assets and screenshots. It's not because they don't, it's not because they're too lazy to hire artists or, something like that. It's because it just frees up so much of the bureaucracy. It's like, okay, you sent us this stock asset, we're going to put it on this card. That's a whole lot easier to rubber stamp than spending all the time dealing with an artist. I mean, it's not a bad idea to occasionally splurge on a few, like, really desirable cards to have some custom artwork for, like the Naruto card I showed off before, where you can have, like, you can drop some money to get some really special cards or something like that. But, like I said, it's not a sin to use screenshots. Like the Bleach card game used screenshots. I actually got this card as a promo from meeting some of the designers. And for the most part, they look okay. I actually like the Bleach card game. It's a card game that did that whole separate stack of resources long before Force of Will ever did. Like, each character has, like, a different set of resources that they, like you learn what your character's resource deck is before you build your deck, so you can have that in mind. I liked the Bleach card game. I actually played it. I played a Chad deck because, when you're a total Chad like me, a total Chad like me, you have no choice but to play a Chad deck. So, yeah, although, here's the thing about artwork. If you are going to, stump the money and take the time to put out, custom artwork for your game, credit your artists. I swear, it's the one thing about Yu-Gi-Oh! That bugs me is that they don't credit their artists. I mean, sure, the cards say, they do say Kazuki Takahashi on them, but he doesn't do all of the artwork for this game. They don't mention who does the artwork for these Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards, and I just can't stand it. Also, if you are going to credit your artists, please make sure you credit them in the language that you're printing the cards in, Force of Will. They credit the artists in Japanese, even on the English cards, and that bugs me too. But yeah, I'm serious when I say you need to credit your artists. I like seeing the artists, seeing where they go, seeing the sorts of stuff they work on. Like Naoki Saito, the artist for that Holy Awe that I got signed, also did this Wika card for Pokemon. Yeah, he's still getting work. And I am also a huge stan of Melissa Benson. It's why I used Shivan Dragon as my example so much in the set rotation video, because Melissa Benson did the art. You can tell when Melissa Benson did the art based on this. Like, there were a bunch of Melissa Benson cards in the first booster pack I ever bought with my own money. That was an Urza's Legacy pack, and it had Cloud of Fairies in it. It also had Yavimaya Worm, which started not just my love affair with her artwork, but also with the worm creature type that lasted for a lot of my childhood. But yeah, credit your artists. If you don't, you are a complete monster. It's like not giving somebody credit who worked on a movie or worked on a video game or something. And, credit your layout artists, too. They deserve to get credits in, like, your rule book or something. Because, people put work into that art, and I really care about that art. So it's always nice to see. Although, I guess moving on, a lot of people also suggested, I was talking specifically about licenses, but a lot of people are talking about, what if you base your game on something that's public domain, like Cthulhu or something, and Cthulhu or like Romance of the Three Kingdoms, Arthurian Legend, and for a lot of cases, it's because that is actually pretty oversaturated. Like, the moment Sherlock Holmes went public domain, there were like 10 billion Sherlock Holmes projects that came out. Same with Cthulhu. I mean, even Hecatomb knew that they could not rely entirely on Cthulhu when they made their game, so they actually have all sorts of horror subjects from all over the place in Hecatomb, because so many people have done stuff with the Elder Gods and all of that, and I don't think there is like a single Western property that hasn't in some regard invoked like Arthurian legend, like Magic the Gathering has. Here it is, the card based on the Round Table. This is it, Arthur's Knights of the Round Table. They call it the Circle of Loyalty, but it's a legendary artifact about knights and roundness. It is very clearly supposed to be an invocation of the Round Table. And then, I mean, you have games like Myths and Legends, which is like nothing but. What Myths and Legends does is they don't have it based on like one pantheon, one set of lore, one public domain thing. Instead, they go all over the place. There's definitely nothing wrong with using public domain stuff as your inspiration. Like I said, there's Arthurian lore. If you like do some sets, if you base characters on stuff from public domain, you can definitely get something with that. But you're not going to like make a card game that will last for a super long time based on like a single piece of public domain lore, unless you're the kind of game that runs really lean. Yeah, like somebody pointed out that Redemption managed to do it, but Redemption is it's a very, very lean running game. Redemption actually only puts out like one new set per year, and the creator of the game was quite candid with me on this. It is a game with a limited clientele. It does have a very select clientele, Redemption does, and that certainly has an effect on its success, but it is also worth pointing out that it is very possible to run a trading card game even if you run it a bit slim. It's possible to run a game lean. Like, even games that are less successful than games that get abandoned, like the Transformers card game, or which was a recent thing, or like, you know, Luck and Logic or Dragonborn, even though those games got a much wider release and were more successful than Redemption was, those were games that came from large studios and had a whole lot of staff to maintain. They, you know, if the game wasn't really super successful, they would kind of have to cut it because they need to get those workers invested somewhere in order to make their money's worth. But in a game like Redemption, where the crew is actually pretty slim, where they only have like a few people working on it, like a handful, like somewhere between like 6 to a dozen, and they only have like a few artists who they work with, or they use stock assets. Like Redemption uses a lot of stock assets. They actually had an entire set based on the TV show Angel Wars. They have a bunch of cards that come from some Christian comic book series. They run really lean. If you're ready to run lean, if you are prepared to have a game that is adopted by a small but devoted fan base who is more than happy to have the special little thing that they're a part of, you can prepare for that. You can actually run a game for a long time if you're able to do it that way. It means that you're probably going to be charging a premium for your cards, and sell fewer cards. Like Redemption, I know, charges a premium for their cards. Otherwise, you're getting cards that contain cards from older packs. But yeah, having a niche little indie title can still work as long as you're not in it for like some sort of crazy money and you haven't like poured like so many assets into it that it has to be a crazy success or else you're doomed. It is very, very possible to do that, and I reckon that's what a lot of people who watch my videos are getting prepared for. Although apparently my videos are getting some reach, that's nice. Although I guess maybe I should properly clarify, I'm not making these videos to say, ooh, if you do these things in your game, that means you're evil. My real goal in this is more to open dialogues on a lot of these things that people take for granted, that like granted as industry wisdom, like set rotation. A lot of people say, oh, why do we do set rotation? It's to maintain a healthy standard environment and make the game easier to get into for new players. I mean, the trick is kind of obvious there. Your game already has a standard environment before rotation, unless it's suffering from a severe case of chicken mox. And what are you giving the players who you already have by doing set rotation? At the moment, it seems like you're asking them to burn half their cards for nothing, except, a bit of the, bird in the hand, two in the bush fallacy. So that's why games like Magic and Pokemon are constantly experimenting. They're constantly coming up with new stuff, because otherwise, it's stuff that, makes it worthwhile. Because, if a player asks, you're asking us to burn half our cards for nothing, what are you going to give us? Most games would be kind of like, but with Pokemon, with like Magic the Gathering, they can be like, okay, you can leave if you'd rather not burn half your cards, but I guess it just means you're going to have to miss out on Ravnica. It's a pity, though. But yeah, that's what Magic and Pokemon do. They are constantly coming up with new stuff. They have blocks that have these amazing features that get people who are already playing the game to stick with the game. They are constantly adventuring and doing new stuff and saying what's going to replace those cards is super duper awesome and you don't want to miss out. They understand how to not just, use rotation to get rid of troublesome rules and reach out to new players, but also to keep the players they already have enthralled and entertained by providing them with new toys to play with. So yeah, that's my goal there. Episode 6 might take a while. Like I said, it's the longest episode by far. I've been kicking a lot of stuff down the road on this one, but we'll have to see. But yeah, I actually found the one the one pocket model TCG I had left, the Star Destroyer. I couldn't find any of my other ones. I used to have like a bunch of those like demo like Y-Wings and like TIE Fighters and stuff, but all I have left is this this Star Destroyer. But yeah, I might have actually cheated by calling this a TCG, because it's actually a model builder game, which is technically a miniatures game rather than a trading card game. But it did have a deck attached to it actually, so bit of an oddball. But yeah, so it might be a while before I get to episode 6, but hopefully I'll have some actual games to look at. I might do some videos on some specific trading card games or on some other stuff while I get that ready. But hey, thanks for watching, and until next time, this is Kodak signing off.